What happens when a mother's love collides with the cold machinery of one of South Korea's biggest entertainment empires? What if the contract you signed in good faith turned out to be a cage disguised as a golden opportunity? And what if the only person brave enough to pull back the curtain wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a journalist, but a mom who had simply had enough? Tonight, we're diving headfirst into one of the most explosive behind-the-scenes revelations in K-pop history, a story that shook the foundation of JYP Entertainment and sent shockwaves through the global Stay fandom. We're talking about Stray Kids, the group that redefined fourth-generation K-pop, the group that sold out stadiums worldwide, the group that made JYP billions. But behind every spotlight, there's a shadow, and this time, that shadow has a name, a face, and a voice that refuse to stay silent. How far did JYP really go? Which clauses were allegedly broken? And how does each member of Stray Kids connect to this web of contractual chaos, broken promises, and corporate power plays? From hidden training debts to questionable revenue splits, from mental health neglect to creative suppression, we're counting down 8 jaw-dropping angles you absolutely need to know. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical idol drama. This is a mother declaring war on a billion-dollar system. Are you ready? Let's go. Number 8 starts right now. Number 8. I.N. Hyunjin, the youngest signature, the heaviest invisible debt. You know what's terrifying about the K-pop trainee system? It's not the grueling dance practices at 2 in the morning, it's not the vocal lessons that leave your throat raw, and it's not even the diet restrictions that make you forget what a full meal tastes like. No, the most terrifying part is something you never see, something that hides in the fine print of a contract that a teenager and their parents sign with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. We're talking about training debt, and when it comes to young Hyunjin, the youngest member of Stray Kids, this story hits differently because it forces us to ask one brutal question. How much does it actually cost to manufacture a dream? Hyunjin was born on February 8, 2001, in Busan, South Korea, and let's get something straight right away. This kid wasn't some privileged heir to a wealthy family with connections in the entertainment industry. He was a regular kid from a regular household who happened to have an extraordinary voice and an even more extraordinary determination. He auditioned for JYP Entertainment when he was still in middle school, and when he got accepted as a trainee, his family believed they were handing their son over to one of the most reputable companies in the Korean entertainment world. JYP Entertainment, founded by Park Jin-young himself, had a reputation that sparkled. They were the house that raised twice, GOT7, 2PM, and Wonder Girls. They were supposed to be the nice company, the one that treated their artists like family, the one that had that famous motto about character over talent. So when Hyunjin's mother signed that trainee contract, she believed she was giving her son the best possible chance at his dream. But here's where the nightmare begins, and this is something that many fans around the world still don't fully understand. In the K-pop industry, when you become a trainee, the company doesn't just invest in you out of the goodness of their heart. Every single one spent on your vocal training, your dance classes, your language lessons, your housing, your meals, your styling, your medical checkups, even the water you drink during practice, all of it goes into a ledger. A tab. A running total that grows every single day you remain a trainee without debuting. And here's the kicker, you don't get to see that ledger whenever you want. Most trainees and their families have no transparent access to exactly how much is being accumulated against them. They sign a contract that essentially says the company will invest in their development, and in return, once the trainee debuts, a significant portion of their future earnings will go toward paying back that investment before they see any real profit. Now, let's put this into perspective for Hyunjin specifically. He entered JYP Entertainment as a trainee and went through the survival show process that eventually became Stray Kids. The show aired in 2017, and Stray Kids officially debuted on March 25, 2018. Hyunjin was only 17 years old when he debuted, making him the maknae, the youngest member of the group. But even before that debut stage, the financial clock had been ticking. Every month he spent as a trainee, the debt grew. Industry insiders and former trainees from various companies have estimated that the average training debt for a K-pop idol can range anywhere from 100 million to 500 million Korean won, which translates to roughly 75,000 to 375,000 US dollars. Some trainees who train for 5 or more years can accumulate debts exceeding that range significantly. And this isn't money that the trainee or their family borrowed from a bank. This is a unilateral calculation made by the company, often with minimal transparency about the actual costs being charged. Now, here's where the alleged contract violation comes into play, and why Hyunjin's situation as the youngest member makes this angle so heartbreaking. According to multiple reports and the broader allegations that surfaced when one of the Stray Kids members' mothers spoke out, one of the key issues was the lack of transparency in how training costs were calculated and communicated to the families. Korean entertainment law has evolved over the years, partly due to high-profile cases involving groups like TVXQ, EXO, and BP, where contract disputes led to landmark legal battles. The Korean Fair Trade Commission actually issued standardized contract guidelines for the entertainment industry, and these guidelines specifically address the issue of training cost transparency. Companies are supposed to provide clear, itemized breakdowns of training expenses, and there are supposed to be caps on how much can be deducted from an artist's earnings to repay these debts. The allegation here, and this is crucial, is that JYP Entertainment did not fully comply with these transparency requirements. Families were allegedly given vague summaries rather than detailed, itemized accounts. Imagine being Hyunjin's mother for a moment. Your teenage son is living away from home, training 12 to 16 hours a day, barely sleeping, barely eating properly, and you're told that all of this is an investment in his future. But when you ask exactly how much that investment is costing, exactly where the money is going, you get corporate language and deflection instead of clear numbers. You're told to trust the process, to trust the company, to trust the system that has produced so many successful groups before. And you do trust it, because what other choice do you have? Your son's dream is on the line, and pulling him out means not only crushing that dream, but potentially being liable for whatever costs have already been accumulated. This is the trap that many K-pop families find themselves in, and for the youngest member's family, the emotional weight is amplified because you're talking about a child, a minor. Someone who legally cannot even fully consent to the financial implications of the contract they're entering into. Korean law requires parental consent for minors signing entertainment contracts, but the power dynamic is overwhelmingly in the company's favor. Parents are presented with complex legal documents, often in high-pressure situations where their child is begging them to sign, where the opportunity seems once in a lifetime, and where the company's reputation serves as a substitute for actual transparency. Hyunjin's journey through the Stray Kids survival show added another layer to this. During the show, he was one of the members who faced potential elimination, which meant the emotional stakes were astronomical. His family watched their son go through televised judgment while simultaneously being bound by a contract whose financial terms they may not have fully understood. And when Stray Kids finally debuted and started generating revenue through album sales, concerts, merchandise, endorsements, and brand deals, the question of how that revenue was being split and how much was being deducted for training costs became even more critical. The K-pop industry standard, though it varies from company to company, typically involves a heavy split favoring the company in the early years, sometimes as extreme as 90-10 or 80-20 in the company's favor during the training debt repayment period. For a group like Stray Kids, which exploded in popularity relatively quickly, the sheer volume of revenue they generated should have theoretically cleared any training debt within the first couple of years. But without transparent accounting, families had no way to verify when that debt was actually paid off, or if additional costs were being added to the ledger even after debut. This is the invisible weight that sat on the youngest member's shoulders, a financial chain that he may not have even fully comprehended at 17 years old. And this is why, when we talk about contract violations, this isn't just about legal jargon and corporate memos. This is about a family from Busan who sent their baby boy to Seoul with nothing but hope and a prayer, only to discover that the system they trusted might have been playing by its own rules all along. The training debt issue is the foundation of everything else we're about to uncover in this countdown, because if the very first financial agreement between artist and company is shrouded in opacity, what does that tell you about everything that comes after? But hold on, because we're just getting started. If you think the financial opacity around training costs is bad, wait until you hear what allegedly happened with the actual revenue splits once Stray Kids became a global phenomenon. Which members' earnings were allegedly calculated in a way that raised serious red flags. Stay right here, because number 7 is about to blow the lid off everything you thought you knew about how your favorite idols get paid. Number 7, Seungmin, the golden voice silenced by the fine print, the revenue split scandal. Alright, let's talk about money, and I mean the real money, the kind of money that makes corporate executives smile and artists question everything they've sacrificed. Because if number 8 was about the invisible debt that starts before you even debut, number 7 is about what happens after the money starts rolling in, and trust me, this one is going to make you look at your favorite K-pop group's comeback celebrations very, very differently. Let's talk about Kim Seungmin, born on September 22nd, 2000, in Seoul, South Korea, the member of Stray Kids whose voice has been described as the emotional backbone of the group's discography. Seungmin is the kind of vocalist that producers dream about. He has this clean, stable, incredibly versatile tone that can carry a ballad just as powerfully as it can cut through a high-energy dance track. He's the guy who covers legendary artists like Day6, Young K, and IU with such precision that vocal coaches on YouTube literally use his performances as teaching material. But here's the thing about being an extraordinary vocalist in a K-pop system. Your voice generates revenue, massive revenue, through album sales, streaming royalties, concert tickets, and sync licensing deals. And when we start examining how that revenue gets divided between the company and the artist, Seungmin's situation becomes a case study in everything that's allegedly wrong with how JYP Entertainment structured their cooperation agreements. Let's break this down with some hard context first, because you need to understand the sheer scale of money we're talking about. Stray Kids, as of their peak commercial period, were consistently selling millions of albums per release. Their album, 5 Star, sold over 5 million copies, making them part of an incredibly elite club in K-pop history. Their world tours were grossing tens of millions of dollars per leg, with venues ranging from massive arenas in the United States to sold-out dome concerts in Japan. Their merchandise revenue, their brand endorsement deals, their digital streaming numbers across platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and Melon. All of it combined created a revenue stream that industry analysts estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Now, here's where it gets ugly. The standard K-pop contract, even under the improved guidelines issued by the Korean Fair Trade Commission, allows for a revenue split that heavily favors the company, especially in the early to mid-contract years. But what the guidelines also mandate is transparency in how that split is calculated, what categories of revenue are included, and how deductions are applied before the artist's share is determined. The allegation that emerged, and this connects directly to the broader claim that JYP violated the cooperation contract, is that the revenue split was not being calculated in a straightforward manner. Instead of a clean percentage split on gross or clearly defined net revenue, there were allegedly multiple layers of deductions applied before the member's share was calculated. Think of it like this. Imagine you and a business partner agree to split profits 50-50. Sounds fair, right? But then your partner starts deducting costs that you never agreed to, things like office renovations, company retreats, executive bonuses, marketing campaigns for other products under the same corporate umbrella. And suddenly your 50% of the profits is 50% of a number that's been whittled down to a fraction of the actual revenue generated. That's the essence of what was allegedly happening, and for someone like Seungmin, whose vocal contributions are literally embedded in every single track that generates streaming royalties, this isn't just a business dispute. It's a fundamental question of fairness. Let's dig deeper into Seungmin's specific situation. Unlike some members of Stray Kids who are part of the producing Unit 3 Racha, which means they earn additional songwriting and production royalties through KOMCA, the Korean Music Copyright Association, Seungmin's primary contribution is his vocal performance. Now, in a fair system, vocal performance should be compensated robustly because without the vocalist, the song doesn't exist in its final, sellable form. But the way K-pop contracts are typically structured, performance royalties are bundled into the group's collective earnings, which are then split according to the contract terms. This means that Seungmin's individual contribution, no matter how essential, gets pulled into a collective pot that is then subject to all those layers of deductions we just talked about. And here's a detail that many fans don't know. The revenue from different sources is often categorized and split at different rates. Album sales might have one split ratio, concert revenue might have another, merchandise might have yet another, and digital streaming might have its own separate calculation. The allegation is that JYP Entertainment was not transparent about these different category splits, and that the overall effective rate that members were receiving was significantly lower than what a surface-level reading of the contract might suggest. Seungmin's family, like the families of all the members, would have had limited visibility into these calculations. Quarterly or annual financial statements provided by the company allegedly lacked the granular detail needed to verify whether the splits were being applied correctly. When you're a family receiving a summary that says your son earned X amount this quarter, you might feel grateful if the number seems reasonable. But if you don't know that the total revenue generated was 10 or 20 times that amount, you have no way to assess whether X is fair. And this is exactly the kind of opacity that the cooperation contract was allegedly supposed to prevent. A cooperation contract, by its very nature, implies a partnership, a mutual agreement where both parties have access to relevant financial information and where both parties benefit proportionally from the success of the venture. If one party is controlling all the financial data and only sharing selective summaries, that's not cooperation, that's control. Now, let's add another layer to Seungmin's story that makes this even more compelling. Seungmin has been one of the most consistently hardworking members in terms of public-facing activities that generate revenue for the company. His variety show appearances, his radio hosting gigs, his OST contributions, his fan meeting interactions, all of these are revenue-generating activities that require his time, his energy, and his talent. Each of these activities has its own revenue stream, and each of those streams is subject to the contract's split terms. But if those terms are opaque, if the deductions are unclear, if the categorization of revenue is done in a way that minimizes the artist's share, then every hour Seungmin spends working is an hour where the value of his labor is being captured disproportionately by the company. And let's talk about Japan for a moment, because this is a critical piece of the puzzle that many international fans overlook. Stray Kids' Japanese activities, including Japanese versions of their songs, Japan-exclusive releases, Japanese concert tours, and merchandise sold in Japan, are often handled through a subsidiary or partner company arrangement. In JYP's case, their Japanese operations involve specific contractual structures that may differ from the Korean contract terms. The allegation suggests that the revenue from Japanese activities was being channeled through corporate structures that further reduce the members' effective share. Japan is one of the biggest music markets in the world, and for a group like Stray Kids that regularly topped Oricon charts and sold out dome tours in cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, the Japanese revenue was enormous. If that revenue was being filtered through additional corporate layers before reaching the members' split calculation, the financial impact would be substantial. For Seungmin, who participated in all of these Japanese promotions and gave his voice to every Japanese version of every track, this means his labor was generating revenue across multiple markets and multiple corporate entities. But his compensation was allegedly being calculated in a way that didn't reflect that full value. This is the heart of the revenue split scandal. It's not that the members weren't being paid at all. It's that the system was allegedly designed in a way that made it nearly impossible for the members or their families to verify whether they were being paid fairly. And when one mother finally decided to challenge this system, to demand the transparency that the cooperation contract was supposed to guarantee, the implications went far beyond one family's financial concerns. It exposed a structural issue that potentially affected every member of the group, every activity they participated in, and everyone they had earned since their debut. But if you think the revenue split issue is the deepest this rabbit hole goes, you haven't heard anything yet. Because number 6 is about to take us into territory that involves not just money, but identity itself. What happens when a member is thousands of miles from their homeland, bound by a contract they signed as a teenager, in a country where they're technically a foreigner navigating a system that wasn't built for them? Which member's unique background allegedly made them more vulnerable to contractual imbalances that their Korean-born group mates might not have faced? Keep watching, because this next one is going to hit you right in the heart. Number 6, Felix, the boy from Sydney trapped between two worlds, the foreign trainee loophole. Now we're entering territory that a lot of people in the K-pop industry don't want you to think about too deeply, because once you start pulling this thread, the entire fabric of how entertainment companies handle their foreign trainees starts to unravel. And there is no member of Stray Kids who embodies this issue more viscerally, more painfully, and more urgently than Lee Yo-bok, the boy the world knows as Felix. Born on September 15, 2000, in Sydney, Australia, Felix is Korean-Australian, a kid who grew up eating meat pies and speaking English with a thick Aussie accent. A kid who watched K-pop videos in his bedroom in the suburbs of Sydney and dreamed of standing on those same stages. And when he got the opportunity to audition for JYP Entertainment, he didn't just cross an ocean. He crossed into an entirely different legal, cultural, and contractual universe. One that allegedly didn't have the safeguards in place to protect someone in his unique position. Let's set the scene properly, because you need to understand what it means for a teenager to leave everything behind and enter the Korean entertainment trainee system as a foreigner. Felix didn't just pack a suitcase and hop on a plane for a fun gap year experience. He left his family, his friends, his school, his entire support system in Australia, and landed in Seoul, South Korea, where he had to navigate a language he wasn't fluent in. A culture with social hierarchies and expectations vastly different from Australian society, and a contractual agreement that was written in Korean legal language that even native Korean speakers find dense and difficult to parse. This is the first critical point, and it connects directly to the alleged contract violations. When a minor who is a foreign national signs an entertainment contract in South Korea, there are specific considerations that should be addressed. The contract should account for the trainee's visa status, their language proficiency, their access to independent legal counsel who can explain the terms in their native language, and the additional costs and logistical complexities that come with being a foreign national living and working in Korea. The allegation here is that these considerations were not adequately addressed in the cooperation contract, and that foreign trainees like Felix were essentially subjected to the same contractual terms as Korean trainees without sufficient accommodation for their vastly different circumstances. Think about what this means in practical terms. Felix arrived in Korea and immediately became dependent on JYP Entertainment for virtually every aspect of his daily life in a way that his Korean group mates simply were not. His visa status was tied to his trainee position, which meant that if he left the company or was released from his contract, he would potentially lose his legal right to remain in South Korea. This creates a power imbalance that goes far beyond the typical company-artist dynamic. For a Korean trainee, leaving the company means going home, maybe going back to school, maybe trying another agency. For Felix, leaving the company meant being sent back to Australia, thousands of miles away from the dream he had sacrificed everything to pursue, with the added stigma of having failed in an industry that offers very few second chances. This visa dependency is something that labor rights advocates in South Korea have been raising concerns about for years, and it applies not just to entertainment trainees, but to foreign workers across various industries. But in the entertainment context, it's particularly insidious because the emotional investment is so high. Felix wasn't working in a factory where the work is purely transactional. He was pouring his heart, his identity, his entire sense of self into becoming an idol. The company wasn't just his employer, it was the gatekeeper to his life's dream. And that level of emotional dependency, combined with legal dependency through visa status, creates a situation where the foreign trainee has almost zero leverage in any contractual dispute. Now let's talk about the language barrier, because this is not a minor detail. This is fundamental to the question of informed consent. When Felix and his family engaged with JYP Entertainment's contractual documents, those documents were in Korean. Standard Korean entertainment contracts are complex legal instruments that reference Korean civil law, Korean labor law, Korean intellectual property law, and industry-specific regulations issued by bodies like the Korean Fair Trade Commission. Even for a native Korean speaker with a legal background, these contracts require careful analysis. For an Australian family whose primary language is English, the barrier to truly understanding what they were agreeing to was enormous. Now, a fair and ethical company would ensure that foreign trainees and their families receive professionally translated versions of all contractual documents, along with access to independent legal counsel who can explain the implications in their native language. The alleged violation here is that this level of accommodation was not provided to the standard that should be expected in a cooperation agreement. If Felix's family received the contract primarily in Korean with only summary explanations in English, their ability to identify potentially unfair terms, hidden clauses, or ambiguous language that could be interpreted against their interests was severely compromised. And this isn't hypothetical. This is a pattern that has been documented across the K-pop industry, with multiple foreign trainees from various companies reporting similar experiences. But let's go beyond the contract signing and talk about what life was actually like for Felix as a foreign trainee inside JYP Entertainment, because the contractual issues didn't exist in a vacuum. They played out in real, daily, tangible ways that affected his well-being and his career trajectory. Felix famously struggled with Korean when he first arrived. He's spoken about this openly in interviews and on variety shows, often with humor, but underneath that humor is a reality that was genuinely difficult. He was learning choreography while simultaneously trying to understand the instructions being given in Korean. He was receiving vocal training in a language he was still acquiring. He was navigating social dynamics with other trainees who could communicate effortlessly while he was still constructing basic sentences. And during the Stray Kids survival show, this language barrier became a televised vulnerability. Felix was eliminated from the show partway through, and while the stated reason was related to his overall readiness, his Korean language proficiency was explicitly mentioned as a concern. He was eventually brought back to the final lineup, but that elimination was a traumatic experience that his family watched from the other side of the planet, powerless to intervene, bound by a contract they may not have fully understood. Now here's where it gets really interesting from a contractual perspective. The costs associated with supporting a foreign trainee are inherently higher than those for a domestic trainee. Housing arrangements, visa processing and renewal fees, potential language tutoring, international travel for family visits, the additional administrative overhead of managing a foreign national's documentation, all of these represent real costs. And under the training debt system we discussed in number 8, these additional costs would presumably be added to Felix's individual training debt ledger. But here's the critical question. Were these additional costs disclosed transparently to Felix's family? Were they given a clear breakdown of how much was being charged specifically for foreign trainee-related expenses versus standard training costs? And most importantly, were these additional costs fair and reasonable, or were they inflated in a way that disproportionately burdened the foreign trainee? The allegation tied to the broader contract violation claim suggests that this transparency was lacking and that foreign trainees may have been carrying heavier debt loads without adequate disclosure or justification. Let's also consider the intellectual property dimension, because this is something that affects Felix in a unique way. Felix's image, his persona, his distinctive deep voice, his Australian identity, all of these are assets that JYP Entertainment leveraged for commercial purposes. His Australian background was used in marketing, in variety show appearances, in fan interactions. Essentially, his foreignness was commodified as part of Stray Kids' brand appeal. In a fair contractual arrangement, The use of an artist's personal identity and cultural background for commercial purposes should be something that is explicitly addressed, with the artist retaining meaningful rights over how their identity is used and receiving fair compensation for that usage. The question is whether Felix's contract adequately addressed these identity rights, or whether his foreign status and limited understanding of Korean legal norms made it easier for the company to exploit his unique appeal without proportional compensation. There's also the matter of Felix's earnings being subject to tax obligations in potentially 2 countries. As an Australian citizen earning income in South Korea, Felix's tax situation is significantly more complex than that of his Korean group mates. The Korea-Australia tax treaty addresses double taxation, but navigating this requires specialized tax advice and the costs of that advice, along with any tax liabilities that arise from the complexity of his situation, are additional financial burdens that a fair cooperation contract should address. Number 5. Lino, the second chance that became a silent chain, the elimination leverage. Let's rewind the clock to 2017, to a moment that millions of stays have watched and rewatched on YouTube, a moment that still makes people cry no matter how many times they've seen it, a moment that, on the surface, looks like one of the most beautiful redemption stories in K-pop history. But underneath that beautiful story, underneath the tears and the hugs and the triumphant music, there's an alleged contractual reality that is far less heartwarming and far more calculated than any fan wants to believe. We're talking about Lee Mi-ho, born October 25, 1998, in Gimpo, South Korea, the member the world knows as Lino, and the member whose journey into Stray Kids was marked by a televised elimination that allegedly became the foundation of a power dynamic that haunted his career for years. Before we dive into the contractual implications, you need to understand who Lee Mi-ho was before he ever set foot in JYP Entertainment, because his backstory is crucial to understanding why his elimination and return created such a uniquely exploitable dynamic. Lino wasn't some wide-eyed kid who showed up at an open audition with nothing but a dream and a prayer. This guy had already tasted the entertainment industry. He had worked as a backup dancer, and not for some small-time act, he had danced for BTS. Let that sink in for a moment. Before he was ever a JYP trainee, Lino had already stood on some of the biggest stages in K-pop, performing alongside the most successful boy group in history. He knew what the industry looked like from the inside. He had seen the machine up close. And he chose to leave that behind to audition for JYP Entertainment because he wanted to be more than a dancer in someone else's shadow. He wanted to be a star in his own right. So when he entered JYP as a trainee and was selected to participate in the Stray Kids survival show, he wasn't coming in blind. He had experience, he had skill, and he had a maturity that came from having already navigated the professional entertainment world. And then they eliminated him. Episode after episode, viewers watched Lino give everything he had, pouring his dance expertise, his improving vocal skills, and his magnetic stage presence into every performance. And then, in a moment that was engineered for maximum dramatic impact because, let's be real, these survival shows are television products designed to generate emotional engagement, Lino was told he wasn't making it into the final lineup. The cameras captured his face, captured the faces of his fellow trainees who were devastated, captured the tears and the disbelief. And then, in a twist that the show presented as a magnanimous gesture by the company, Lino was brought back. He was given a second chance. The narrative was beautiful. The prodigal trainee returns, the group is complete, the dream lives on. Millions of fans celebrated. But here's what nobody was talking about at the time, and what the alleged contract violation brings into sharp focus. That elimination and return created a psychological and contractual dynamic that fundamentally altered Lino's position within the company's power structure. Let's talk about what it means, psychologically, to be eliminated and then brought back. In any organizational context, when you're fired and then rehired, the power dynamic shifts dramatically and permanently in the employer's favor. You carry with you the constant, unspoken awareness that you were deemed expendable once, and you could be deemed expendable again. Every disagreement, Every contract negotiation, every moment where you might want to push back on unfair terms is colored by the knowledge that the company has already demonstrated its willingness to cut you loose. For Lee No, this dynamic was amplified by the fact that his elimination wasn't private, it was public. Millions of people watched it happen. It became part of his origin story, and while fans reframed it as a story of resilience and destiny, from a power dynamics perspective, it was a permanent reminder that the company held the cards. Now, let's get into the contractual specifics. When Lee No was brought back into the Stray Kids lineup, what were the terms of his return? This is a critical question that ties directly into the alleged contract violations. In a fair system, his return would have been on the same contractual terms as every other member. Same revenue split, same obligations, same rights, same protections. But the allegation, and this is where it gets really dark, is that the elimination and return process may have been used as leverage to secure less favorable terms. Think about the negotiating position of Lee No's family at that moment. Their son had just been publicly eliminated from a group he desperately wanted to be part of. He was devastated. They were devastated. And then the company comes back and says, "We've decided to give him another chance." In that moment, the family's leverage is essentially zero. They're not going to negotiate hard on contract terms when the alternative is their son losing his dream permanently. They're going to sign whatever is put in front of them with grateful hands and grateful hearts, because the emotional relief of their son being reinstated overwhelms any impulse to scrutinize the fine print. This is not a theoretical concern. This is a well-documented negotiation tactic in business contexts. You create a crisis, and then you present the resolution to that crisis in a way that makes the other party so grateful for the resolution that they accept terms they would never have agreed to under normal circumstances. Whether JYP Entertainment intentionally used the elimination as a negotiation tactic is something we can't know for certain, but the structural outcome is the same regardless of intent. Lee No's family was in a position of minimum leverage at the exact moment they were asked to commit to contractual terms that would govern their son's career for years to come. Now, let's layer on top of this the ongoing psychological impact and how it allegedly manifested in the day-to-day operations of the group. Multiple industry insiders have discussed how K-pop companies use informal power dynamics to maintain control over their artists, and one of the most common tactics is the implicit threat of replacement or dissolution. For most Stray Kids members, this threat was abstract, a general industry reality that hangs over every group. But for Lee No, it was concrete and personal. He had been replaced once. He knew exactly what it felt like to be told he wasn't good enough. And that knowledge, that visceral, embodied memory of elimination, allegedly made him less likely to challenge unfair contractual terms, less likely to question company decisions, less likely to advocate for himself in situations where other members might have felt more empowered to speak up. This is what labor psychologists call coercive compliance, a state where the worker complies with unfavorable conditions not because they agree with those conditions, but because their past experiences have conditioned them to fear the consequences of resistance. And in Lee No's case, that conditioning happened on national television at the age of 19. Let's also examine how the elimination narrative was commodified by the company. Lee No's elimination and return became a central part of Stray Kids' brand mythology. It was referenced in interviews, in behind-the-scenes content, in fan events, and it served to reinforce the narrative that JYP Entertainment was a benevolent company that gave deserving trainees second chances. But that narrative also served a more strategic purpose. It positioned the company as the grantor of opportunity rather than an equal partner in a cooperation agreement. Every time the elimination story was retold, it subtly reinforced the message that Lee No owed his career to the company's generosity, not to his own talent and hard work. This framing has real contractual implications because in a cooperation agreement, both parties are supposed to be contributing value and both parties are supposed to benefit. The company contributes resources, infrastructure, and industry expertise. The artist contributes talent, labor, and creative energy. It's supposed to be a partnership. But when the narrative is structured so that one party is positioned as a benevolent savior and the other as a grateful recipient of charity, the partnership framework is undermined, and the artist's leverage in any contractual discussion is diminished. Lino's contribution to Stray Kids has been enormous and undeniable. His dance skills are considered among the best in fourth-generation K-pop. His stage presence is electrifying. His personality, that unique blend of savage humor and unexpected warmth, has made him one of the most beloved members among fans worldwide. His solo dance performances are viewed millions of times. His variety show appearances generate buzz and revenue. He is not a charity case who was given a second chance out of pity. He is a world-class performer whose talent and dedication have directly contributed to generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for JYP Entertainment. And yet, the elimination narrative, the second chance framing, allegedly created a contractual and psychological environment where his full value was not recognized in the terms of his agreement with the company. Now consider Lino's growth trajectory within the group and what it reveals about the gap between his contribution and his contractual leverage. Number 4, Changbin, the pen that bled gold but never got its worth, the creative exploitation trap. Right now I need you to do something before we go any further. Open your music app, go to any Stray Kids album, pick any track, and scroll down to the credits. Look at the songwriting credits, the composition credits, the arrangement credits. You're going to see certain names appearing over and over and over again, names that belong not to some faceless team of hired studio producers sitting in a boardroom, but to the members of the group themselves. And among those names, one appears with a frequency and a ferocity that tells you everything you need to know about who is actually building the musical foundation that made Stray Kids a global phenomenon. Seo Changbin, born August 11, 1999, in Yongin, South Korea, rapper, songwriter, producer, and one-third of the legendary producing Unit 3 Racha. And his story at number 4 in our countdown isn't just about money, it's about the fundamental question of who owns art and who profits from it when the creator and the distributor are bound by a contract that allegedly wasn't designed to be fair. Let's establish the creative landscape first, because the sheer volume of Changbin's output is staggering when you actually sit down and count it. Stray Kids are famous in the K-pop industry for being one of the most self-producing groups in history. Unlike many idol groups where the songs are written by external composers, produced by in-house company producers, and handed to the group to perform, Stray Kids, through 3 Racha, are involved in writing, composing, and producing the vast majority of their own music. Changbin, alongside Bang Chan and Han, has credits on hundreds of songs, not just title tracks, but B-sides, special releases, unit songs, mixtape tracks, and collaborative pieces. His rap lyrics alone represent thousands of hours of creative labor, meticulously crafted wordplay, emotional storytelling, and technical skill that took years to develop. But here's the thing that most fans don't realize. Having a songwriting credit and being fairly compensated for that songwriting credit are 2 entirely different things, and the gap between them is where the alleged contract violation lives and breathes. In South Korea, songwriting and composition royalties are managed through KOMCA, the Korea Music Copyright Association. When a song is played on the radio, streamed on a digital platform, performed at a concert, used in a TV show, or played in a public space, KOMCA collects royalties on behalf of the credited songwriters and composers and distributes those royalties according to the registered share splits. This is separate from the performer royalties that come through the group's collective earnings under their contract with JYP Entertainment. In theory, KOMCA royalties should provide Changbin with a direct revenue stream that reflects his creative contribution, money that flows from KOMCA to him personally, independent of the group's contract with the company. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is the core of the alleged exploitation. When a song is registered with KOMCA, the copyright shares are split among the credited creators. But who decides how those shares are split? In many K-pop companies, the company itself plays a significant role in determining how songwriting credits are divided and what percentage each credited party receives. And here's the critical detail. JYP Entertainment, as the publisher, typically holds a publishing share of every song released under its label. This means that even on songs that Changbin wrote, composed, and produced, JYP Entertainment receives a percentage of the KOMCA royalties through its publishing rights. The question is whether that publishing percentage is fair and whether it was transparently communicated and agreed upon. The standard music industry publishing split varies widely, but in the K-pop context, companies have historically claimed publishing shares that many industry observers consider disproportionately high relative to the creative input the company actually provides. If Changbin sat in a studio at 3 a.m, wrote every lyric, composed every melody line for his rap sections, and co-produced the beat, but JYP Entertainment's publishing agreement entitles them to a substantial percentage of the royalties from that song simply because they are the label and publisher, then the effective compensation Changbin receives for his creative labor is significantly reduced. And remember, this is on top of the fact that his performance royalties as a group member are already subject to the revenue split issues we discussed in number 7. So Changbin is potentially being underpaid twice, once as a performer through the group's contract, and once as a creator through the publishing arrangement. Let's put some numbers to this so you can grasp the scale. A Stray Kids title track that charts well globally can generate millions of streams across platforms. On Spotify alone, a hit track can accumulate hundreds of millions of streams over its lifetime. Each stream generates a tiny royalty, but at those volumes, the total royalties are substantial. Now, those streaming royalties are split between the master recording owner, which is JYP Entertainment, and the publishing rights holders, which include both the songwriters through KOMCA and JYP Entertainment through its publishing share. If Changbin's effective take from each stream, after the publisher's share is deducted and after his co-writing shares with other 3 Ratcha members are calculated, is a fraction of the total royalty, then even hundreds of millions of streams translate to compensation that doesn't reflect the true market value of his creative contribution. A songwriter of Changbin's caliber and output, operating as a freelance creator in the Western music industry, would command significantly higher royalty rates and more favorable publishing terms. But because he's locked into a K-pop contract that bundles his creative work with his performance obligations, his songwriting is effectively subsidized by the company's broader control over his career. The alleged contract violation here specifically relates to whether the cooperation agreement clearly and fairly outlined the publishing terms, whether Changbin and his family were given a transparent explanation of how KOMCA royalties would be split, and whether the publishing share claimed by JYP Entertainment was in line with the guidelines and norms that the Korean Fair Trade Commission has established for the industry. If the cooperation contract was supposed to be a transparent partnership, then the publishing terms should have been a clearly negotiated component with the creative members having meaningful input and the ability to seek independent legal advice. The allegation suggests that this level of transparency and negotiation was not provided, and that the publishing terms were presented as non-negotiable standard provisions rather than as points of genuine partnership discussion. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture of Changbin's creative exploitation, because it goes beyond just the royalty math. Changbin's creative output is not just a revenue source, it's a competitive advantage that JYP Entertainment leveraged to differentiate Stray Kids in an incredibly crowded market. The fact that Stray Kids write and produce their own music is one of their most powerful marketing points. It's emphasized in press releases, highlighted in interviews, used in promotional materials, and cited by music critics as evidence of the group's authenticity and artistic credibility. This self-producing identity directly translates to commercial value. It's why music publications take Stray Kids seriously, why Western media gives them coverage, why brand endorsement deals are pitched at premium rates. But here's the irony. The very thing that makes Stray Kids commercially valuable, their creative independence, is something that Changbin and his fellow 3 Ratcha members provide through their labor. JYP Entertainment benefits enormously from being known as the company that has a self-producing group, but the creative labor that generates that reputation is done by the artists, not the company. In a fair cooperation agreement, this additional value creation should be recognized and compensated accordingly. The artists aren't just performing, they're building intellectual property. They're creating the very content that the company sells. And if the contract doesn't adequately compensate them for that creative contribution, separate from and in addition to their performance compensation, then the cooperation agreement is failing in its most fundamental obligation. Changbin has talked in various interviews and behind-the-scenes content about his creative process, and it's clear that songwriting is not just a job for him, it's a deeply personal form of expression. His lyrics often draw from his own experiences, his emotions, his struggles, and his relationships. Songs about anxiety, about the pressure of the industry, about missing home, about proving doubters wrong. These aren't generic pop lyrics manufactured for commercial appeal. They're pieces of Changbin's soul committed to record. And when someone pours that level of personal investment into their creative work, the question of fair compensation becomes not just a financial issue, but a deeply ethical one. You're not just underpaying a worker, you're undervaluing someone's most intimate form of self-expression. There's also the issue of creative control and how it intersects with compensation. While stray kids are celebrated for their creative freedom, the extent of that freedom is ultimately governed by the company. Number 3. Han. The bravest confession that corporate walls couldn't contain. The mental health betrayal. This is the one I need you to really sit with, because everything we've talked about so far, the training debts, the revenue splits, the foreign trainee loopholes, the elimination leverage, the creative exploitation, all of those are about money, about power, about corporate mechanics. But number 3 is about something that no contract clause can quantify, no revenue spreadsheet can measure, and no corporate PR statement can undo once the damage is done. We're talking about the human mind, the human heart, the invisible war that rages inside someone who smiles on stage while crumbling behind the curtain. We're talking about Han Jae-sung, born September 14, 2000, in Incheon, South Korea, rapper, vocalist, songwriter, producer, the other third of 3 Racha, and the member of Stray Kids who did something that very few K-pop idols in history have had the courage to do. He told the world, openly and without filter, that he was struggling with anxiety and panic disorder. And the alleged contract violation connected to his story isn't about numbers on a page. It's about a corporation that was allegedly contractually obligated to protect his mental health and, according to the claims, failed to do so in ways that are both infuriating and heartbreaking. Let's start with the reality of what Han has been through, because you cannot understand the severity of the alleged negligence without first understanding the severity of his struggle. Han has spoken publicly, in interviews, in fan communications through platforms like Bubble, and in the group's own documentary content, about experiencing panic attacks. Not just nervousness, not just pre-show jitters, not just the normal anxiety that comes with performing in front of thousands of people, but full-blown panic attacks, the kind where your heart races so fast you think you're having a cardiac event, where your vision tunnels, where your hands go numb, where you can't breathe, where your body is convinced it's dying even though your rational mind knows it's not. Anyone who has experienced a panic attack knows that it is one of the most terrifying physical and psychological experiences a human being can endure. Now imagine experiencing that while you're contractually obligated to perform on stage in front of 70,000 people, while cameras are capturing every angle of your face, while fans are screaming your name, while your group mates are counting on you, while the company's quarterly revenue projections depend on the show going on as planned. That is the reality Han Jae-sung navigated, and the question at the center of this point is whether JYP Entertainment's cooperation contract included adequate provisions for mental health support and whether the company honored those provisions. Korean entertainment contracts, particularly under the improved guidelines issued by the Korean Fair Trade Commission in the years following high-profile cases of idol mental health crises, are supposed to include clauses addressing the physical and mental well-being of the artists. These clauses typically require the company to provide access to professional medical and psychological care, to establish reasonable working hours and rest periods, and to create mechanisms through which artists can flag health concerns without fear of professional repercussions. The cooperation contract between STRAYKIDS members and JYP Entertainment allegedly included such provisions, because any modern K-pop contract that doesn't address artist welfare would be flagrantly non-compliant with industry regulations. But having a clause in a contract and actually implementing that clause are two very different things, and the allegation here is that the gap between the written promise and the lived reality was vast. Let's talk about the schedule first, because schedule is the most direct link between corporate decisions and mental health outcomes. STRAYKIDS' schedule, particularly during their peak commercial period, was relentless by any standard. Album production cycles, which for a self-producing group like STRAYKIDS means the members themselves are in the studio writing, composing, recording, and refining tracks, followed immediately by music show promotions, which involve daily pre-dawn departures for rehearsals, filming, and live performances across multiple broadcast networks. Then come the variety show appearances, the radio interviews, the magazine photo shoots, the brand endorsement filming, the content creation for YouTube and social media, the fan sign events, the online fan interactions, and then, on top of all of that, the world tour preparations, rehearsals, and performances that can span months and cross dozens of cities and time zones. This is not a schedule designed for human well-being. This is a schedule designed to extract maximum commercial value from the artists during the peak of their popularity. And for someone like Han, who is already battling anxiety and panic disorder, this kind of relentless, high-pressure, no-rest schedule isn't just uncomfortable, it's medically dangerous. Mental health professionals universally agree that consistent sleep deprivation, chronic stress, lack of personal time, and the pressure to perform at a high level without adequate rest are among the most significant triggers for anxiety disorders and panic attacks. The cooperation contract was supposed to protect against exactly this, to ensure that the company's commercial ambitions did not come at the cost of the artist's health. But the allegation is that the scheduling decisions made by JYP Entertainment consistently prioritized revenue generation over the mental health protections promised in the contract. Now let's get specific about what adequate mental health support would actually look like, because this isn't about providing a company hotline number on a laminated card and calling it a day. For an artist with a diagnosed anxiety and panic disorder, adequate support means ongoing access to a dedicated mental health professional, ideally a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist who specializes in performance anxiety and the unique pressures of the entertainment industry. It means regular therapy sessions that are built into the artist's schedule, not crammed into whatever leftover time exists between promotions. It means the ability to step back from specific activities when mental health symptoms escalate, without that decision resulting in financial penalties, public criticism from the company, or damage to the artist's standing within the group. It means proactive monitoring by management to identify signs of mental health deterioration before a crisis occurs. And it means creating an organizational culture where seeking mental health support is normalized, encouraged, and genuinely supported at every level of the company. The allegation is that JYP Entertainment fell short on multiple of these fronts. While the company publicly projected an image of caring about artist welfare, particularly after the tragic losses that have shaken the K-pop industry in recent years, the internal reality allegedly did not match the external messaging. Han's panic attacks didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened in a professional environment that was allegedly structured in a way that exacerbated his condition rather than mitigating it. And when he needed to step back, when he needed rest, when he needed the kind of intensive professional support that his condition required, the alleged response from the company was inadequate, delayed, or conditioned on commercial considerations rather than medical necessity. There's a moment that fans remember vividly, when Han was absent from certain promotional activities and performances due to his mental health. The company's public statements about these absences were carefully worded, acknowledging his condition without providing details, which is appropriate from a privacy standpoint. But the allegation from the family side is that behind those public statements, the private reality was far less supportive. The family allegedly felt that the company treated Han's mental health absences as disruptions to the commercial schedule rather than as medical necessities that triggered the duty of care provisions in the cooperation contract. The family allegedly had to fight for accommodations that should have been automatically provided under the contract terms, and the emotional toll of that fight, on top of the emotional toll of watching their son suffer, was immense. Let's also address the medication and treatment dimension, because this is something that people outside the mental health community often don't understand. Panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder are medical conditions that often require pharmacological intervention in addition to therapy. Number 2, Hyunjin, the storm that exposed the company's true colors, the crisis abandonment. If you've been following this countdown from the beginning, you've watched us peel back layer after layer of a system that allegedly promised cooperation but delivered control, that promised partnership but practiced exploitation. But everything we've discussed so far, the debts, the splits, the loopholes, the leverage, the exploitation, the neglect, all of it existed in the background, behind the smiles and the choreography and the album sales, hidden from public view. Number 2 is different. Number 2 happened in broad daylight, in front of millions of eyes, across every social media platform on the planet, and the way JYP Entertainment allegedly handled it didn't just raise questions about contractual compliance. It allegedly exposed the fundamental lie at the heart of the cooperation agreement. We're talking about Hwang Hyunjin, born March 20th, 2000, in Seoul, South Korea, the member whose face could launch 1,000 magazine covers, whose dance moves stop you mid-scroll, whose artistry and visual presence have made him one of the most iconic figures in fourth-generation K-pop. And we're talking about the crisis that nearly ended his career, a crisis where the company that was supposed to stand beside him allegedly chose to stand behind a corporate shield instead. February 2021. Remember that month, because in the K-pop world, it landed like a bomb. Allegations of school bullying from Hyunjin's middle school days surfaced on online community boards, the kind of allegations that in Korea carry a particular cultural weight because the issue of school violence, known as hakpak, is treated with extreme seriousness by the Korean public. Within hours of the initial posts, the story had exploded across Naver, Twitter, Instagram, and every K-pop forum in existence. Hyunjin's name was trending worldwide, and not for a comeback or a performance or a fashion collaboration, but because someone from his past had accused him of being a bully during his school years. Now, before we dive into the contractual implications, let's establish the context of what these allegations meant in the Korean cultural landscape, because international fans sometimes underestimate the severity. In South Korea, school bullying scandals have ended careers permanently. Multiple celebrities, athletes, and public figures have seen their entire professional lives collapse overnight because of hakpak allegations, sometimes based on verified accounts and sometimes based on anonymous, unverified claims. The Korean public's tolerance for past bullying behavior is essentially zero, and the court of public opinion moves faster than any legal proceeding. So when these allegations hit Hyunjin, the stakes weren't just about a few bad headlines, they were existential. His career, his reputation, his future, everything was on the line. And this is the exact moment, the precise crisis point, where a cooperation agreement is supposed to mean something. When the contract says the company and the artist are partners, when the contract outlines mutual obligations of support and protection, when the contract establishes that both parties will work together to navigate challenges, this is the moment where those words are supposed to transform from ink on paper into real, tangible action. So, what allegedly happened? According to the broader allegations tied to the contractual violation claims, JYP Entertainment's response to the Hyunjin crisis was calculated, corporate, and ultimately self-serving in ways that allegedly violated both the spirit and the letter of the cooperation agreement. Let's break down the timeline and the company's alleged decisions. The initial response from JYP Entertainment was to issue a statement acknowledging the allegations and announcing that Hyunjin would be going on an indefinite hiatus from all group activities. On the surface, this might seem like a reasonable crisis management step, removing the member from public view while the situation is assessed. But look deeper at what this decision actually entailed and who bore the costs. When Hyunjin was placed on hiatus, he was effectively removed from his livelihood. No performances, no promotions, no public appearances, no content creation, no brand endorsements. His income, already subject to the revenue split issues we've discussed, was essentially frozen. But here's the critical contractual question. During that hiatus, what were Hyunjin's financial terms? Was he still receiving his contractual share of the group's ongoing revenue? Was his training debt still accumulating interest or deductions? Were the brand endorsement deals that were cancelled due to his hiatus resulting in penalty costs that were being charged to him? The allegation is that the financial implications of the hiatus were borne disproportionately by Hyunjin rather than being shared as a partnership cost under the cooperation agreement. In a true cooperation, when a crisis hits one partner, both partners share the burden. The company would absorb the financial impact of the hiatus as a cost of doing business, recognizing that the crisis management serves the long-term interests of both the artist and the company. But the allegation suggests that JYP Entertainment treated the hiatus costs as Hyunjin's problem, deducting losses and penalties from his account while the company continued to generate revenue from STRAYKIDS' existing catalog, merchandise, and content that featured Hyunjin's image and likeness. Think about that for a second. The company pulled Hyunjin from activities, which means he couldn't generate new income. But the company continued to profit from his past work, from music videos featuring him, from album tracks with his vocals, from merchandise bearing his image, from concert recordings and behind-the-scenes content where he appeared. His labor was still generating revenue even while he was on hiatus, but his share of that revenue was allegedly being reduced or frozen. This is the contractual equivalent of firing someone but continuing to sell the products they built, and it's exactly the kind of imbalance that a fair cooperation agreement should prevent. Now let's talk about the legal and public relations support, because this is where the alleged abandonment becomes most stark. When a crisis of this magnitude hits a K-pop idol, the company's legal and PR teams are the first line of defense. They have the resources, the connections, the expertise, and the institutional knowledge to manage the narrative, protect the artist's legal rights, investigate the claims, and develop a strategy for rehabilitation and return. The cooperation contract allegedly included provisions for the company to provide this kind of support, recognizing that in the entertainment industry, an artist's reputation is a shared asset that both parties have an interest in protecting. But the allegation is that JYP Entertainment's crisis management was focused primarily on protecting the company's brand rather than protecting Hyunjin as an individual. The company's public statements were carefully crafted to distance the JYP brand from the controversy while leaving Hyunjin exposed. The apology that was issued, which included a personal statement from Hyunjin, was allegedly crafted under company direction in a way that prioritized public appeasement over Hyunjin's personal narrative. Whether Hyunjin's personal account of events was fully represented in that apology, whether he had meaningful input into the crisis strategy, whether he was provided with independent legal counsel who represented his interests rather than the company's interests, these are all questions that the alleged contract violation raises. And independent legal counsel is a crucial point. In a situation where the company and the artist might have conflicting interests, which is inherently the case in a crisis that threatens the company's brand, the artist needs their own lawyer, someone whose sole obligation is to the artist. The cooperation agreement should guarantee access to independent legal representation in exactly these circumstances. The allegation is that this was not adequately provided, and that Hyunjin and his family were navigating one of the most devastating moments of his life with legal guidance that was filtered through the company's priorities. Let's also talk about the emotional dimension of the hiatus, because the contractual failure here isn't just financial and legal, it's human. Hyunjin was 20 years old when this crisis hit. 20. He was a kid, barely out of his teenage years, facing a public firestorm that would be overwhelming for a seasoned adult with decades of life experience. The online hate he received was vicious, relentless, and psychologically devastating. Death threats, calls for his permanent removal from the group, campaigns to destroy his career, attacks on his family, all of this was pouring in through every digital channel 24 hours a day. Number 1. Bang Chan. The leader who carried it all, the mother's war against the machine. This is it. The summit. The peak. The one story that every single point in this countdown has been building toward, the gravitational center around which all the training debts, the revenue splits, the foreign trainee vulnerabilities, the elimination leverage, the creative exploitation, the mental health negligence, and the crisis abandonment all orbit. Because when we talk about stray kids, when we talk about the alleged contract violations, when we talk about the mother who stood up and said no more, every road leads to one person. The person who has been carrying the weight of this group on his shoulders since before most fans even knew the group existed. Christopher Bang, born October 3, 1997, in Sydney, Australia, known to the world as Bang Chan, leader of Stray Kids, the longest trained member in the group's history at JYP Entertainment, and the man whose story is so intertwined with every single issue we've discussed tonight that separating him from the narrative is like trying to separate the ocean from its waves. Let's go back to the very beginning, and I mean the very beginning, because Bang Chan's journey at JYP Entertainment didn't start when the Stray Kids survival show aired. It started in 2010. He was 13 years old, a Korean-Australian kid from Sydney who auditioned during a global audition tour, impressed the casting team, and was offered a trainee contract. He moved from Australia to Seoul, left behind his family, his friends, his school, his entire life, and entered the JYP trainee system at an age when most kids are worried about homework and weekend plans. And then he trained. And trained. And trained. For 7 years. 7 years as a trainee before Stray Kids debuted in 2018. To put that in perspective, most K-pop trainees who debut do so after 2 to 4 years of training. 7 years is an eternity in the K-pop system, a period during which Bang Chan watched multiple generations of trainees come and go, watched some debut in other groups, watched others give up and go home. Watched the company's attention shift from project to project while he waited for his chance. During those 7 years, every single day added to his training debt, every vocal lesson, every dance class, every meal, every month of housing, every piece of clothing for showcases, all of it accumulating on a ledger that grew longer and heavier with each passing season. By the time Stray Kids debuted, Bang Chan's individual training debt was allegedly one of the highest of any member, simply because his training period was the longest. And this is where his story connects to ends at number 8, but amplified by years. If the transparency issues around training debt calculation that we discussed were real, then Bang Chan's family had been living in financial opacity for 7 years, trusting the company with their son's future while having limited visibility into how much that future was supposedly costing. But the training debt is just the foundation. What makes Bang Chan's story the number 1 position in this countdown is the unique burden of leadership and how that burden allegedly became the company's most powerful tool of control. When JYP Entertainment formed Stray Kids, Bang Chan wasn't just placed in the group, he was given the role of leader. And in K-pop, the leader role is not a ceremonial title, it's a functional position with real responsibilities that go far beyond what most fans see. The leader is the liaison between the group and the company. The leader communicates management's decisions to the members, mediates internal conflicts, maintains group discipline, and most critically, bears responsibility for the group's professional conduct and public image. In practical terms, this means Bang Chan was the person who had to deliver bad news from the company to his members, the person who had to enforce scheduling decisions even when those decisions were detrimental to the members' well-being, the person who had to maintain morale when the workload was crushing, and the person who had to present a unified front to the public even when things were falling apart behind the scenes. And here's the insidious part. The company allegedly leveraged this leadership role to ensure compliance with contractual terms that were unfavorable to the artists. If a member had a complaint about their schedule, about their compensation, about their treatment, the first person they would go to is their leader. And Bang Chan, bound by his own contractual obligations, his sense of responsibility to the group, and his fear that rocking the boat could jeopardize the careers of 7 other people who depended on him, would often absorb that complaint rather than escalate it. He became, in effect, an unpaid middle manager, a buffer between the company's demands and the members' well-being, carrying the emotional weight of every issue we've discussed in this countdown while simultaneously managing his own struggles with the same system. Now let's talk about Bang Chan's creative contribution, because this connects to Changbin's story at number 4, but with an additional layer of complexity. Bang Chan is the de facto leader of 3 Racha, the producing unit. He is involved in the production of virtually every Stray Kids track, often credited as the primary producer, the person who spends countless nights in the studio refining beats, mixing tracks, coordinating the creative vision of the album. His production work goes beyond songwriting. He's making decisions about arrangement, sound design, vocal processing, and overall sonic direction that define Stray Kids' musical identity. This level of creative input means Bang Chan is functioning simultaneously as a performer, a producer, a creative director, a leader, and a liaison between the group and the company. Each of these roles would be a full-time job on its own. Combined, they represent a workload that is staggering, and the alleged contractual framework did not compensate these roles separately. His performance compensation, his production royalties, his leadership duties were all bundled under a contract that allegedly didn't differentiate between the value of each contribution. He wasn't being paid as a leader plus a producer plus a performer. He was being paid as one thing, a group member, while doing the work of 3 or 4. What this countdown reveals is not just a dispute between one family and one company. It reveals a systemic issue in the K-pop industry where the word cooperation in a contract can mean something very different from genuine partnership. It reveals that the artists who generate billions of dollars in revenue, who sacrifice their youth, their health, their privacy, and their freedom, are often the least empowered participants in the business that profits from their labor. And it reveals that sometimes the most powerful force for change isn't a lawyer, isn't a regulator, isn't a journalist, but a mother who loved her son enough to break the silence. To every stay watching this, remember that loving an artist means caring about the person behind the performance. The music will continue, the concerts will go on, the albums will drop. But the question of whether the people creating that music and standing on those stages are being treated fairly, that question deserves your attention just as much as the next comeback. And to every parent of every trainee in every agency across the entertainment industry, this story is a reminder. Read the contract, ask the hard questions, demand transparency, and never, ever let the brightness of the spotlight blind you to the shadows it creates. That's our countdown. That's the story. That's the truth that one mother refused to let stay buried. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and we'll see you in the next one.